right, well, we'll just go ahead and get started and let more folks come as we go. So welcome back and thanks for being here. We're looking forward to continuing to partner with you on this project and continue the Pell process. I know it's been a while since we last met and we have plenty of content to cover with you today. But before we start, I want to welcome all of the community members in attendance. Looks like there's 2 of you so far, and there may be more coming in. So these are folks who are not part of the tag, and you will be in listen only mode today and won't have access to submit comments in the chat box. But if you have comments and questions or other thoughts you'd like to share, we invite you to send those to us via our project inbox. And as I think most of you know, we log every comment that comes in through that inbox in our public comment log, which we share with all of the advisory groups ahead of each of these meetings, and which we'll talk about in just a couple of minutes. Just a reminder that we are recording today, and we'll post the meeting recording on the project website for anyone who's unable to attend live. So I think we're all pretty familiar with Zoom, but we'll do a round of introductions using the chat box. So if you could please share in the chat, making sure that you send this to everyone as opposed to hosts and panelists only. Just select everyone so our audience members can follow along. Your name and the agency or tribe that you represent. Welcome. I see Allison has joined us, and Betsy and Chris. Nice to have you today. Hi, Jessica and Carl. Yay, great. I'll just let those intros roll in for a minute or two here. Hi, Mary. Welcome, welcome. Thanks so much for spending your time with us today. And if at any point we are moving too fast or you didn't hear something, please just use the chat box to let us know. And we will go ahead and circle back, and we will try to make sure that every comment that is sent in the chat box gets brought into the conversation verbally. So folks who prefer not to be tracking both places can just listen to the conversation. So we can move on to our meeting objectives. So for the meeting today, really our main objective is to explain how KEG and TAG and community feedback was used to develop our level 2 screening report, which we sent to you by email a couple of weeks ago, and I think again, or just preceding this meeting. And first on the agenda is an overview of where we are in the Pell process now. Then we'll do an in-depth look at our level 2 screening and have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So we are going to ask that we save questions and discussion for the end. Of course, you're welcome to send in your questions using the chat box as they come up, but we will just hold off and make sure we cover all of the content just in case that answers any questions that come up. So on the right, you'll see the roadmap that we've been sharing with you for about the past year or so. And these are the steps that we've mapped out of the Pell process. Not each of these is going to be its own meeting, as evidenced by we are covering 3 of these topics today. We'll be reviewing some of the themes from our community engagement back in the early summer. Our level 2 screening, results of that screening, and we'll start to look at the alternatives that we're carrying into the environmental phase. So before we get started on all of that, are there any questions about the agenda or what we're hoping to accomplish here today? Or is anybody having issues with tech that we want to address before we get started? Great. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and just pass it over to Hadley to get us started on community engagement and the public comment log.
Thanks, Lauren. So I know it's been a few months since we last met as a technical advisory group, and that was before our latest round of community outreach last May and June. You all received our outreach summary with the meeting invite for this meeting, and then we sent it early in the summer. So I think you might be familiar with what we heard, but I just wanted to run quickly through some of the key themes of the community input we received on the level 1 screening, so that we're all kind of using it as a foundation for the conversation today and how we approach the level 2 screening round. This graphic illustrates some of the key themes we heard from communities. We had a total of 477 comments during that roughly month of community outreach with an online open house, a couple virtual public meetings, and other conversations that happened during that time. In total, since we started the Pell study process, we've received over 1,000 comments. These 477 were really focused on the level 1 screening, where we narrowed the range of alternatives down to the 9 we carried into level 2 screening. So some of the themes we heard, as the graphic illustrates, were focus on accommodating growing demand for ferry service, the reliability of ferry service, and enhancing efficiency. A lot of comments on improving safety and connections for people who bike, walk, or roll onto the ferry. A lot of comments about preserving the environment and nearby resources, including Cove Park next to the terminal. And then some comments about reducing congestion on Fauntleroy Way. Of the comments we received, they represented a wide range of interests and ideas for replacing the terminal. We heard widespread support for improving terminal operations, reducing congestion, and improving safety. Many ferry passengers, so those who ride the ferry frequently or depend on the triangle route, want an expanded dock to help alleviate some of the operational challenges and customer experience that they have now. And in general, many terminal neighbors were pretty vocal about their opposition to expanding the terminal for various reasons. And so we kind of felt among those comments that there was a fairly even split or no consensus among the community on which alternative or which approach we should focus on. Just as many people want a larger dock or expanded holding area as want the dock to stay about the same size as it is today. So those comments and discussions, along with the conversations we had with the 3 advisory groups before that round of public outreach, show a fairly high level of public controversy and a significant level of kind of coordination that we need to do with agencies and with the community as we begin to determine which alternative we're going to move forward, or alternatives plural. So that's, sorry about that. So that's kind of where we're at with the community engagement. As you also could see, we got about 56% of comments from Vashon Island, so folks who live on the island and rely on the ferry, and a fairly small number from South Kitsap County and Southworth. So that's something we noted and know that we need to do better in future rounds of community engagement, of reaching Southworth ferry customers and that community. And then we heard about a total of nearly 40% of the comments came from the east side of the water. So Fauntleroy, West Seattle, and elsewhere in the Seattle area or beyond. And that was kind of interesting information. So we also shared with you the other day our updated public comment log, which is something we've been maintaining since we started the Pell process. And the log includes all the comments we've received sort of outside of the formal community engagement period. So everything that's not included in that community engagement summary I was just talking about. Since May, we've received 14 new comments. The comments pretty much echo what we heard during the community outreach. And they're summarized there for you. Every comment we get, we add to the log and we'll share with you. We've shared with our community advisory group and executive advisory group so that you can see what we're hearing from the public and other stakeholders as we move along. So before I pass it on, any questions or comments about community engagement or the comments we're receiving from the community?
We do have a question from Allison O'Sullivan asking if there's a link to the comment matrix. And we do have a comment appendix to the community engagement summary that we sent out that we could share with you. And if there was anything else that you were referring to, please let us know.
Any other questions about public comment or what we heard? on the level 1 screening. And Allison, I'll email you those materials here in a minute as we continue with the meeting.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't see any hands up or comments in the chat, so I think we can move forward.
Oh, thanks, Hadley. We'll move on, sharing with you more about the level 2 report. So we're, as you can see by our timeline that we've been using since the early parts of our Pell study, that we're getting closer to transitioning from planning into the environmental review process that's guided by the National Environmental Policy Act and the State Environmental Policy Act, known as NEPA and SEPA. We know that most of you are familiar with this, but just bear with me for those of you who just need a little brush up, is that we follow NEPA and SEPA processes because the project involves federal and state permits and approvals. And it requires, NEPA requires federal agencies to assess and publicly share environmental effects of proposed actions before deciding to build a project. In the same way, SEPA also requires the state agency to conduct environmental review in the same manner. So we're currently working with Federal Highways, as you know, as our federal lead to identify potential impacts and appropriate level of documentation. We don't know yet which level of documentation we will be doing and how PEL feeds into it. FHWA will provide us with that direction. The goal of this environmental analysis is to find an alternative with the least possible impact and that is buildable. We'll analyze the impacts to the built and natural environment, including transportation flow, visual impacts, and impacts to natural resources, etc. So as you can see, we're also going to be conducting a good to go study, and it follows us through the same time frame as completing the Pell report and then moving into environmental review. So at this point, I'll just let Charlie Torres speak a bit about what's included in that good to go study.
Thank you, Marcia. We're to go ticketing study, and what our consultant's going to be looking into is researching implementation solutions, validating historical data, identifying policy constraints, reviewing previously published reports, analyzing feasibility of potential solutions, and then they're going to be sharing with us this winter, January or February, a draft white paper summarizing their findings.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Now let's talk a little bit about the level 2 analysis and how we're moving toward more closer with these alternatives that will take us into the environmental review stage. So we use the same screening matrix as level 1 and focused on the criteria that we heard most about from the CAG and the TAG and the broader community. And they are listed, as you can see here: operations and customer experience, safety, multimodal connections, traffic circulation, parks and recreational areas, and permitting and coordination. So these are the alternatives we advanced from level 1 and carried into level 2. They are all at the existing Fauntleroy site, and they either replace the dock with the same size to hold 80 vehicles or are a larger dock that can hold up to 186 vehicles. So they are alternatives A1 through 3 and B and C. And then here again, here is the initial, after that initial analysis, we found that some alternatives scored lower than we scored them in level 1, and those will not proceed to environmental review. So just as a reminder, here's the level 1 matrix that resulted from that screening. And then added on to that, you can see the level 2 results when they come up. So they're represented by the circular icon, which shows that for alternatives A4 through 7, there were 3 or more unlikely to meet categories, and those are not advancing. This includes the 2-lane holding and 2-direction approach and remote holding options. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Mark so he can walk you through the alternatives and explain a bit more about how the scores changed and what we're moving forward with.
Great, thanks, Marcia. We go to the next slide. Yeah, so as Marcia said, I'll focus on the 4 alternatives that we looked at again, and at a high level in those areas that Marcia mentioned, and why the scores are going to result in these not moving forward. This is page 6, starting on page 6 in the draft report if you want to follow along. I'll just hit the highlights that are described there. So A4 is basically the 2-lane holding option, where there's 2 lanes on Fauntleroy Way. And we heard pretty clearly from prior conversations with both you and the community advisory group, some pretty strong feedback that this would not be a viable option from a multimodal perspective. And then as we looked at this further, we also found operational efficiency and customer experience, that it was also not likely to meet the purpose and need. And so I'll just talk to you some of the issues that we found. So in a multimodal perspective, reminder in this one that by converting one of the lanes to the second holding lane, it meant that basically Fauntleroy Way would only be northbound for general traffic. And the multimodal impact here, as you'll recall, was for the Route C, Rapid Ride C would have to be substantially rerouted, which is a pretty significant impact for connectivity to transit service. Also for people walking and or biking across Fauntleroy Way or along Fauntleroy Way, this configuration would create some additional conflicts for those modes. This also likely could cause some confusion and frustration for people who are loading in the ferry, as one lane of holding might move faster than another and kind of lead to concerns or questions about line cutting. And then from an operations perspective, you'll see that we noted that basically with 1 lane per destination, that means that you probably have to staff the toll booths more hours of the day than you otherwise would just based on demand alone. So that's not efficient. And then a couple other considerations on a permitting, is that it would remove some on-street parking along Fauntleroy Way, which obviously has a residential impact as well as potential access to Lincoln Park. All right, now we can go to the next slide. So alternative A5 is the 2-direction holding. So this would have added holding along Wildwood Place. We noted for Southworth. Again, similar to A4, we heard skepticism from both the community advisory group as well as you all about the viability of this. So some of the issues that, as we looked at this further, that arise is that this complicates operations for loading vehicles onto the terminal, because you have vehicles coming from 2 directions, and then they have to cross at the intersection going onto the terminal. At the intersection itself, you'll note that the Wildwood Place lane is on the right side of the street, and so that traffic would have to turn left onto the terminal from the right side of the street, requiring a complex either signalized operation and or personnel in this field managing that conflict. The other thing we know from a customer experience perspective is that with a direction, one holding lane from either direction being per destination, new or infrequent ferry customers could end up approaching from the incorrect direction based on their destination, and they would then have to circulate around somewhere to get into the correct holding lane based on the destination, again, leading to some frustration and confusion. The additional holding lane along Wildwood Place also increases the areas where holding of ferry traffic conflicts with residential driveways. And we also noted that if you look at the curve that is on the left side of the graphic here, reconfiguring the street for a holding lane through that that curve tightens up those travel lanes and making it possible that there's some increased conflict for larger vehicles like trucks and then of course the metro buses. And then back to the intersection area, that taking the holding lane on Wildwood Place up to the ferry dock entrance potentially displaces the rapid ride stop that is right there proximate to the terminal, which would obviously have an impact of decreasing the connectivity between ferry riders and Metro Transit. So that's increasing wait times and crossing distances, et cetera. So those are all things we noted that decreased this alternative scores in some key areas. Go to the next slide. So A6, this is the first of the two remote holding alternatives. This one shows the holding area on the graphic that's near 47th Avenue Southwest and Fauntleroy Way. So a couple things to note here. So you see the size of that holding area. We need to design these for the size of vehicles that can travel on the ferry system. And so it can, basically be larger than you might expect because you have to account for those large vehicles. In this case, it just would, if it was located here, displace some both residential properties as well as a gas station. And then you can see potentially close off one of the local streets and causing some impacts there. From a ferry operations perspective, this has got some inefficiencies in it because it complicates the loading process that WSF would have to do by coordinating the release of vehicles from this remote holding area down to the terminal in a pretty coordinated fashion as spaces become available down at the dock and at the terminal. On a safety perspective, this configuration and location of the remote holding would introduce some new conflict points between vehicle traffic and other modes in and around the area of the remote holding. It also has impact to some of the bicycle pedestrian infrastructure because the local street being closed off to provide the remote holding. And then in terms of some permitting and environmental considerations, obviously the function here could increase noise for nearby residents. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the displacement of the gas station and some residential properties. So again, this is many other reasons why this one's scoring lower in a couple of key categories. Go to A7. So A7 is again a remote holding alternative. This has the remote holding shown at Lincoln Park. Again, you'll see the size of the holding area is much larger than maybe you would think it was, and this was locating it at the current parking lot that's at Lincoln Park. So it has many of the same operational efficiency, customer experience issues as I just described in A6. In addition to that, this has, from a permitting and environmental impact perspective, it obviously displaces parking at Lincoln Park as well as park areas itself, and which would require extensive discussions, coordination, mitigation. And so that's a reason that is, again, is scored as a moderate or low to, change from moderate to a low or no likelihood to meet in a couple of the key areas. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Marcia, who will talk about what remains after eliminating these 4 alternatives.
Thanks, Mark. So looking back at the results table, you can see where the scores marked with arrows dropped for the alternatives that are not advancing to the next stage of environmental review. Our scores for the remaining alternatives, A1, A2, A3, B, and C did not change in level 2. The scores for the remaining alternatives did not change. But note that alternative C has 2 reds now, and one of which is because of the impacts to recreation resources that would be protected by Section 4F. And so and as a 4F property, that in Cove Park, which is adjacent to the vehicle transfer span or the trestle coming off land onto the terminal, it would be considered a Section 4F property. One of the things we could identify at this point is the potential impacts to Cove Park, as just mentioned, and that are represented in alternative C. So we are no longer considering alternative C that widens the dock as shown in level 1 to accommodate 186 vehicles. We're combining alternatives B and C into a single expanded dock alternative that would be designed to avoid or minimize permanent environmental impacts while providing on-dock holding for up to 124 or to 186 vehicles. This planning level alternatives will be documented in the PEL study as we go forward for further schematic design development to assist environmental review. So there are basically now 2 alternatives. Alternatives A2 and 3, the same dock with good to go or advanced ticketing. We'll work with our consultants to study the viability of implementing those systems at Fauntleroy, and we'll use those results during environmental review. We're also keeping A1 on the table with the understanding that we'll need to have some type of feature or program to meet the purpose and need for operational efficiency. So we've got these 2 to remain in place or to expand the terminal facility. And from here, we'll be working, we'll see with FHWA to determine the format of the environmental review, and we'll need more information. We'll need more information for this, and we'll also have more information for you, hopefully in future meetings. So I'll turn this back over to Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcia. And thank you, Mark, for walking us through those alternatives. And thanks to everyone in attendance for your patience as we walked through all of that. We would now love to hear any comments or questions that you have on the level 2 report and findings. Specifically, we'd like to know if there's anything else that we are missing before we screen out A4, A5, A6, and A7, as Mark just detailed. So is there anything else that we should think about before we move forward screening those out? And feel free to raise your hand if you have a comment or enter your comments in the chat. And if you do enter them in the chat, please make sure you're chatting to everyone.
Lauren, this is Matt Vinci, the fire chief on Vashon.
Thanks, Chief Vinci, go ahead.
Hi, this is my first meeting, so bear with me. I'm still learning, and the staff were really helpful in getting me up to speed. Just a question, this might be too far in the weeds, so please correct me here if I'm going down the wrong lane. Has there been any consideration in, as you discuss the size, and this might be more towards design, about access for emergency vehicles out to the end of the ferry dock, staging of additional emergency vehicles that may need to get to Vashon or get to Southworth. In a large scale incident, we would have to have multiple emergency vehicles staged, ready to go coming from either Seattle or other jurisdictions. And as everyone knows, and I'm learning, I'm new here, it's very congested now, and it's really hard for our vehicles to get, I hate to say, to the front of the line, but we have to at times get out there and get on the ferry. So I might be again down the wrong road here, so please correct me as I'm learning. But that's a very important component to public safety, access to the dock and to the end of the dock.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief Vinci. That is getting a little bit more toward design, but I wonder if Mark has any thoughts or comments on how that's been considered or incorporated so far.
Sure, I'll touch on it, and then we do have Leonard Smith, I think, is on the call from WSF Operations, who knows this stuff inside and out, and Doug Plater, our lead on the designing the terminal. So yeah, Chief Vinci, obviously it is a consideration, and it does factor into when we're talking about the size of the dock. When we talk number of vehicles being held, that's shorthand, but it does also then include the access lanes, space for priority loading, et cetera. And so that will be further studied and evaluated in terms of the layouts, which the team is working on right now. So I guess I'd say, Leonard and Doug, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Mark. So good afternoon, Chief. I think part of that is a design and really kind of a lane usage approach of what we're going to do with the amount of holding we end up with. But when I look at any facility, we consider you guys and the need to get the aid cars even more so at Vashon to the front of the line. And typically, we'll kind of manage that by, at a lot of locations, communicating to the vessel, stop offloading, use the exit lanes to get you up front with you having your lights on, et cetera. But it's also another way to be able to, I think the other way I always look at it is, depending on the number of lanes we have, then we look at how we prioritize that lane usage and where we can stage you to get on the boat as soon as possible. But it is kind of a design, digging into the design a little more. Hope that helped.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does help. I didn't know how it impact. I know you're maximizing space as you design a dock and want to get as many cars out there. And I didn't know how that impacts all the different alternatives that have been presented in terms of how the space is allocated down the road. So thank you. I'll wait for more as we get into more of the design phase.
Yeah, another way to answer this too is we have other criteria or needs for medical priority loads, elevator requests for folks that need to get out of their cars and up. So all of those require some staging to be able to get to the vessel at a certain point in time of when we're loading. So it's a big piece of what we do. And again, it's, you kind of get lumped into that a little bit because we'd certainly put the aid car returning from delivering a patient to the east side in that lane as well. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Leonard, and thank you, Chief Vinci, for bringing that very important piece in. We also have a question from Betsy in the chat asking if the expanded terminal would still have shoulder holding. Mark, do you want to take that first?
Sure. So yeah, what we're it's possible, Betsy, basically depending on ultimately if the terminal is expanded, how much it's expanded, right? So there's a relationship that we've been saying, so along here to plan for 186 vehicles for the size of the ferry that's serving this, plus some additional storage for the early arrivers of the next sailing, et cetera. And so the combination is dock plus the holding lane that's on Fauntleroy Way. Obviously, as the dock, if it expands in size, we would assess how much likelihood there is for that to be, how much is needed out on Fauntleroy Way itself. So in theory, maybe it shortens up, or as that operation happens in the future, WSF and the city could be, working through if there's adjustments in time or the length of that holding lane, depending on how this ultimately plays out. And that's true under either scenario, whether it's the dock stays the same and there's process improvements, or it's larger and there's more on dock holding.
Thank you. Betsy, let us know if you have any follow-up questions or if that missed any part of your question.
That's great. I just
Okay.
couldn't tell because it wasn't shown on the diagram there.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, other questions? I saw Edward, you had your hand up for a moment and then put it down. Just want to make sure if you have a question, you get a chance.
Oh, I'm all good. It was just an error. Thank you.
Got it. Great. Anyone else have questions or comments about screening out A4, A5, A6, or A7? All right, well, if they come to you, definitely please bring them in. But I also want to start going around the room and just making sure everybody has a chance to weigh in. Now that you see these two alternatives that are on the screen there that will advance into the next part of environmental review, are there any impacts or issues that immediately come to mind for these alternatives as we embark on a more in-depth environmental review? So just anything that comes to mind immediately. Laura, I see you have your hand up right away there.
Yeah, hi. Certainly from a natural resource perspective and fisheries, we have concerns with both of those structures being larger than the current structure is. You have new overwater structure with new shade impacts on fish life and aquatic life. And so you would be, for any increase in overwater coverage, we would be looking for permanent compensatory mitigation. To mitigate for that new overwater coverage, we would be looking at eelgrass and macroalgae concerns. Certainly any concerns also to forage fish spawning in the near shore and scour impacts from the vessels as well. And I'm sure there's a slew of others, but those are just a few that left out of me initially from any sort of expansion. So we would be looking at all those different components and needing to have a full sense of what the lay of the land was there for what would be impacted in the long term.
Excellent. Thank you. Betsy, your hand is up.
Hi, thank you. And thanks, Laura, for your comments. Two things just real quickly. I know we already sent you comments from Seattle Public Utilities on utility issues. So just as a reminder, I think that with the longer option, I think there are slightly more complicated utilities, but that would need to be expanded in the area. So I'm pretty sure that those are covered in our previous letter to you, but if you have any trouble finding that, let me know. And then second, I guess maybe just a suggestion or consideration for the longer ferry terminal. I know, as Laura mentioned, there'd be a need for mitigation associated with that, and I'm hoping that through the rebuild of this process, there's a little bit of focus on the mouth of Fauntleroy Creek, which comes out right by the ferry, and I think is impacted kind of by the location of the pilings right now affects how water flows, and a lot of materials getting racked up there, which at times blocks the mouth of the creek in a way that I don't think it would be if the terminal wasn't there. So I'm hoping that's something that could be looked at as you move forward in the design process.
Yes, thank you. And we're just taking these comments and we're going to incorporate them into our actions going forward. But I also just invite Marsha or Mark or anybody who wants to comment if you have anything to please just chime in. But mostly we are recording these to incorporate your feedback. I'm just going to go down the list and make sure that everybody gets a chance. If nothing comes to you at the moment, that is also fine. Just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to hear from each other. So I'm just going to go alphabetical by first name. So Aaron Halbert.
No questions on my end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris Arkills.
Hi.
Hi.
I would, first of all, thank you for eliminating A4, A5, A6, and A7. I didn't feel like any of those either respected the neighborhood or the park or the community, and they all had massive transit implications. So I'm glad those are all gone. I share a lot of the concerns about over the water coverage and mitigation, since there is an active salmon bearing creek right next to this ferry terminal. You can mitigate over the water coverage, but you're still having an effect on a specific place. So I'm very, very skeptical of expanding the dock over the water to 186 cars. And I would have to be convinced that you could do it responsibly with 124 cars. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allison O'Sullivan, are you with us?
I am. Thank
Hi.
you. I don't have any questions at this point. I think I've made it clear in verbal comments, and I did send off a quick email, I don't know, a week or two ago, just that any expansion is going to have the potential to impact tribal treaty fishery activities. So that will need to be addressed. And as far as the forage fish, I don't have a recollection of what species is there, but I believe it's sand lance, and Laura can correct me if I've got them backwards because I occasionally do, but one of them, it's not possible to mitigate for, and I heard that from a WDFW Habitat Bio.
It's surf smelt and sand lance are both documented on site.
Okay.
Okay, yes, thank you very much. And we have your past comments documented as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Benjamin Smith, anything you'd like to add, or issues or impacts you'd like us to immediately flag?
Sure. Hi all, Ben Smith from SDOT. Yeah, I think I concur with Chris. Just it's good to see some of the A alternatives that were really impractical and really impacted the transportation system have been screened out. And also I think C with widening, especially towards the north into city right of way, and the park space that was there, I think was problematic. So it's good to see that that's not moving forward. So I guess my question, because also we're going to circle back internally and check in with folks. So it sounds like we'll have, and they may be renamed or renumbered, but at least 5 alternatives, 3 that were the A's, 1, 2, 3, with different flavors of kind of mitigation, and then at least 2 that are longer, if not, and not wider. That's what we'll see kind of in the next round.
Yeah, so the question is kind of what are the numbers, the kind of the capacity or actual size of the alternatives that we'll see in the next round?
That's clear. The A's all look like they're at 80 vehicles,
Mhm.
and you'll have maybe a smaller 124 and 186. But I'm saying we'll expect at least 5 alternatives at the next round.
Great. Mark, do you want to clarify how these alternatives will be kind of grouped this way going forward?
Sure. I think, yeah, Ben, what we're saying we think is going to be happening here is that essentially there'll be 2 alternatives. There's going to be one that's based around same dock size with operational enhancements put with it. And then there's an expanded one, and we are in the process working with obviously WSF, you all, et cetera. We have to do some more engineering and do more deep study into some of the environmental aspects that have just been touched on by, by many of you, to determine ultimately where does it sit in the size of an expanded dock. So that's why we're using a range of how big it is, because we just don't know yet. There's lots of factors including cost, for example. So, but I'd say it's two alternatives, and to be determined ultimately what's the defining elements of them, if that helps.
That does, and definitely feel free to circle back with us if you start narrowing that range of the expanded terminal. Every with 124 car ferries, but an 80 size dock, the 81st car and on have impacts to the right of way and to Fauntleroy Way. And so that is the trade-off for things like overwater coverage and fish impacts, is just the fewer cars that are stored over water are stored on land and have that implication. So yeah, let us know how we can discuss kind of where you end up landing in that range, or where you're thinking as you narrow this down to one expanded number. Glad to bring in the right folks and chat with you more.
Yeah, well, and Ben, just to be clear, we intend to be coming back to and continue to have this dialogue with you all. So,
yeah, great.
Yeah,
thank you.
We're not going away, coming back and saying, "Oh, we've come back with a number." It's going to be a continuation of the dialogue with y'all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks. Let's see. Next on the list is David Forte. David, any issues or impacts with these two alternatives heading into the environmental review process that you would like to flag for us? Questions you have?
Yeah, one thing on some of the evaluations, the operational are on a little bit pushing forward. We don't support the advanced ticketing or reservation systems that's going through there. That's very problematic. Good to go is definitely something that should have been done years ago as we go through. But there's still some questions about how just it essentially comes down to is you're going to have the same system. The alternatives that left don't add a lot of operational efficiencies as going through. So more than likely, you're going to have to see that it's going to be operations on the scheduling and how you schedule the ferries versus what constraints are now left on the table to operate on the land side as you're going through. So it's going to be problematic moving forward.
Thank you. David Graves, impacts or issues or questions?
Hi all. No questions from me. And I'm sorry, a strategic advisor here at Seattle Parks and Recreation. We are happy to see the impacts that have the most impact to Lincoln Park kind of screened out. So, but we're happy to stay engaged and work with you all on the environmental process as it moves forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and also just to note that based on your areas of expertise and jurisdiction, we may be reaching out to you in the coming weeks or months to schedule other meetings to help refine the alternatives.
Great, sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Edward Coviello.
Nothing directly yet. You know, the biggest thing that we're looking for in the end is any improvement in reliability, on-time performance. That impacts us and our ability to schedule buses to meet up with ferries. So hopefully this helps.
Okay. Great. Keeping reliability in mind and transit connections. Got it. Jacob Brett.
Hi there, thanks. Yeah, I think just kind of as Chris already noted, I think the fact that A4 through 7 are removed is probably the best thing that we've seen so far, just because those were problematic from a transit perspective. I think it would be not so much a question, but a comment that it would be helpful to better understand some of the details and trade-offs between the remaining scenarios. And obviously I know that's probably teed up for the next couple of sessions, but particularly between the replacement scenarios and the expansion scenarios, just not just the details of what the trade-offs are, but the magnitude of them, like, you know, how much speed and reliability impacts there would be between those different proposals. And yeah, but that's it. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So as we go forward and learn more, showing what are the trade-offs between different ways of refining the alternatives. Jessica Olmsted, anything you'd like to add or flag for us?
Hi, yeah, I would just like to, you know, echo our concerns about any expansion for increasing overwater structures and impacts, you know, potential environmental impacts. And then also, you know, I've commented before on this, any expansion outside of the currently authorized area would require, you know, additional land use agreement with DNR.
Noted. Thank you. Okay,
You're welcome.
great. Carl Zimmer.
I have no questions this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carl. There'll definitely be time to share information with your team and get other opportunities to provide feedback. So thank you. Lindsay Handel.
Hi, thank you. So I guess one question or one comment would be that for the dock expansion alternative 2, it's possible there could be some environmental benefits for noise and such to get the boats further away from some of those properties there. And so maybe just a general comment to make sure that we're capturing environmental benefits along with impacts as well, to make sure that it's kind of clear what the trade-offs are. And then it would be really helpful for alternative 1 to see a cross-section of Fauntleroy Way to kind of understand what the existing layout is and then what's being proposed. Thank you.
Yeah, that is very helpful to hear. I'm sure that we can pull something together in the future for you to look at, for everyone to look at.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Laura, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, I just wanted to add, thank you, by the way, I just wanted to add another species of concern that DFW will be evaluating is presence of geoduck. And so if you're expanding that structure and you have an increased footprint on the seabed, how is that going to affect any geoduck that's present?
Thank you. Okay, down the list, Chief Vinci, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I'm all set. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, Penny Kelly, anything you want to flag for us in terms of issues or impacts related to these alternatives?
Yes and no. I mean, just kind of my thought on this is that a lot of what I end up focusing on comes along much further in design. When you start, once you've picked the way that you're going to build this, then I start really kind of diving into some of those design details and construction, because it's the things like water quality for turbidity and concrete really start coming to the surface more. And those are the things that we start really diving into. But that's construction. So this is after you go through all this process, but just continuing to make sure that you do the great job that you're doing with the coordinating of all the resource agencies, because for me, I'm checking in constantly. I shouldn't say constantly, but I am checking in with WDFW, the tribes, and DNR, the folks who have other things. And then the other thing is to also just make sure during the upcoming, as we go through these alternatives, the upcoming review, I do have that connection to shoreline permitting. And then the only other thing I would say is keep pushing alternatives, really looking at ways to improve efficiencies that doesn't necessarily just rely on the physical infrastructure. I understand there are things that are driving your physical infrastructure to change, in part, not just the environmental stuff is affecting it, but also like making sure it's a structure that's safe, meets current safety standards, but still, like the good to go was brought up. And so anywhere where you can get those efficiencies without just saying, we'll just make it bigger, would be great.
Thank you. Yeah, so getting creative with what can we do in addition to the physical infrastructure to make it work better. Awesome. Thank you. And we will continue coordinating with the agencies. And it's really helpful to know kind of what concerns are coming up for you down the road, even if they're not immediately applicable right now. So thank you for sharing those. All right, Sharon Love, anything you'd like to add?
I don't have anything right now. Thank you very much. Appreciate the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much. And Stephanie Lilly, thank you for being so patient. Is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation?
No worries. Nothing that hasn't been covered already. Being last has its benefits.
That's true. All right. Thank you so much. I see the additional comment from Betsy on the SPU design phase on 2 culvert replacement projects that are upstream from Fauntleroy Creek. And we will make sure that those are noted as we move forward in refining the alternatives and take a look at that. And we're so happy to engage the TAG. Thank you for being here. All right, any other questions that came up for folks as we were doing the around the room conversation, or any comments from the project team that you want to respond to?
Yeah, Lauren, this is Mark. I did want to follow up on one thing that occurred to me in response to Lindsay's ask for a cross section, which we can do. Is I just wanted to make it clear that when we're noting the shoulder lane and alternative 1, and even if there is an aspect in even expanded terminal on Fauntleroy, we're talking about the existing holding lane. There's no expansion or widening or of Fauntleroy Way that's part of either of these alternatives. But Lindsay, we can follow up with what the existing configuration looks like and kind of describe that. But I just wanted to be clear, because it occurred to me that maybe this was leading people to think that the road was going to be widened, and that's not the case.
Okay, yeah, I kind of did think it involved some widening, so that is helpful. Thank you, Mark.
You bet.
Great. Thank you. Marcia, anything you want to? Oh, go. Sorry.
Yeah, just I just appreciate that everyone attends and these meetings and provides some input, even though the actual work that you may be involved with in this project and these alternatives doesn't come till later on in the refinement phase, but it really benefits our process, even at this planning level stage, to hear your feedback and your perspective on the direction that the alternatives are going.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Hadley, anything you would like to add before we move into closing out?
No, just that was very helpful to hear. And, from my perspective, I heard sort of a similar balance of reactions to the 2 alternatives that we're hearing from the community, and that some folks are looking at benefits of an expanded facility for reliability and on-time performance and other things, and some are expressing concerns about an expanded facility and additional overwater coverage. So I think it sort of tracks with what we're hearing from the community in the big picture, the range of comments that I just heard from you all today. Range of reactions to these 2 alternatives.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, seeing no other questions in the chat or raised hands, we will show our appreciation for you being here today by giving you about an hour back into your days, which hopefully you can use for something lovely. As I said, we may reach out to you in the coming weeks or months to schedule some individual or smaller group meetings as we continue looking at these alternatives. And we'll take the information that we learned from this meeting back, from those meetings back to this group, as well as the CAG and the EAG and the public. So that's it from us. And I hope that you have a really wonderful rest of your day, and that you never hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or comments. If something comes up for you, as soon as we sign off, please shoot it over to us at our project inbox. And we look forward to hearing from you more and catching up with you again in the coming months as we move forward in this process. So I will let you all go now. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
Thanks,
day.
Lauren.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thank you all.